Despite wearing at least 3 layers of jackets, the first thing Jamie felt upon awakening was the cold. His thick beard, which was covered in a rather thin layer of snow, had also done little to warm his face. As the man began to open his eyes, he felt something else. Pain. A hiss escaped his lips as the throb of sharp stinging echoed throughout his body. Jamie brought his gloved hand to the source of his suffering, which seemed to be originating from his forehead. As soon as he touched the wound, more pain began to resonate throughout him, causing the man to wince. Bringing his hand before him, Jamie could see a streak of red stained into the glove. "Fuck," he whispered in his shivering voice. As the blur in his vision finally faded, Jamie was able to make out his surroundings. In front of him were the shattered remains of his windshield, through which freezing blizzard winds circulated, ensuring his continued lack of warmth. The driver's seat in which he sat let out a creaking noise as he shifted to open the door. Thankfully, he found that it wasn't jammed. With a burst of strength, Jamie pushed his way out of the vehicle and face first into the cold, bitter snow. There was more pain, but it didn't faze him. The icy slush had made his face too numb to feel much of anything. Not wanting to die facing down in the freezing white fluff, Jamie quickly rolled onto his back so he could face upwards. The wind was, as he discovered, even worse without the shelter of his broken truck. The day had since left the accident as well, taking the sun and its healing heat with it. All that surrounded him was darkness coated with the whipping winds of a blizzard. Remembering the pack of emergency supplies he always kept in the truck, Jamie slowly rose to his feet and proceeded back to the driver's side door. He found it quickly, which was hardly a surprise considering how cramped the cabin of his vehicle really was. Inside the leather backpack was a flashlight, peanuts, spare gloves, jerky, flares, a flare gun, a flint and steel, and other miscellaneous things that would no doubt help in his survival. The man quickly proceeded to throw the bag strap over his shoulder. It was then that he noticed the Magnum, which had been haphazardly thrown in the passenger seat. He made sure to grab that too. The wilds of Alaska were a dangerous place, after all. It was only then that Jamie realized something terrifying. He had no idea where he was. Sure, he had been traveling through this area for years, and in any other circumstance, he would have known exactly where to go. But the blizzard made it near impossible to determine his location, let alone which direction would lead him back to his cabin or to the road. The storm crippled his senses and confused his thoughts. Never before had he witnessed such a vicious expression of nature in all the years he'd lived in the area. The only clue he really had was that the road was somewhere south of his truck, for it was the direction that he came. Traveling that way, however, was impossible. An exceedingly steep cliff of snow blocked his path. Frankly, he was surprised he'd survived the accident at all. At that speed and level of descent, he should have died. Clicking on his flashlight, Jamie did the only thing he could do. He began to wander in a random direction in an attempt to find some kind of shelter. It was either that or freeze to death, and he knew it. He only hoped that Lady Luck would help him find his way. Through the deep snow and raw winds Jamie traveled. He was cold, he was alone, and most of all, he was afraid. After what seemed like an eternity of growing frostbite and freezing temperatures, the bright beam of the man's flashlight came to fall upon something very out of place in the forest that surrounded him. Right away, he knew that it wasn't just another tree. Neither was it a rock. No, this was a wall. As he neared the anomaly, hope began to grow within him. A sigh of relief escaped his frozen blue lips as he reached the wall. Examining it, he quickly determined that it was indeed the concrete wall of some structure. Slowly, he began to follow it around 2 corners until finally coming upon an open doorway. Somehow, in the middle of nowhere, he had come to stumble upon an actual building. Although he didn't adhere to any specific religion, Jamie couldn't help but mutter a prayer of thanks. Without any hesitation, he moved inside the concrete building, stumbling over himself and to the floor as he did so. Shining the flashlight around from his kneeling position, he began to understand how small the room really was. It couldn't have been any more than 10 feet across and 10 feet wide, with an extremely low ceiling. Only then did he notice it. The circular hatch lying in the center of the room. At first, he wasn't sure what to think. It wasn't really all that common to see something like this out here, so deep in the frozen forests of Alaska. The building, the hatch, they intrigued him. Regardless, the building itself would not suffice as shelter, for the whipping wind still screeched through the wide open doorway. While it was much better than being outside, Jamie feared, rather he knew, that he would still die that night if he did not seal the doorway somehow, or find somewhere more protected. With nothing in his pack to keep the wind from entering the small room, his eyes naturally turned towards the hatch lying dormant in the center. He slowly began to move towards it, forcing his frozen bones forward until he was standing over it. With a burst of strength and energy, he pushed the heavy lid of the hatch open. Awestruck, he found himself staring downwards into the dark abyss of the hole before him. For a moment, he hesitated. He felt something sinister from within. Shaking away his fear, which was no doubt extremely irrational, he gripped the top metal rung of the ladder and began his descent. Relief washed over him as his foot finally touched the floor. Above him, he could only just hear the raging winds, and they couldn't reach him down there. Darkness, however, surrounded him on all sides. Not a noise was to be heard down there, nor was there any kind of visible light to illuminate his surroundings. Thankfully, Jamie still had his trusty flashlight. The sight that greeted him when he turned it on was not as he'd expected. Lined across the walls were old consoles and monitors, which no doubt predated the 90s. To his left, on the far wall, was a door, and adjacent to that, on the wall to his back, was another. The walls and floors were partially coated with what appeared to be some kind of red paint, though it seemed to have decayed considerably over time. Some of it had even managed to get on the consoles, the monitors, and the doors. To the far wall on his right was something rather disturbing. It was another door, only this one appeared to have been torn from its hinges and tossed upon the floor, leaving an open doorway through which nothing but darkness was visible. Jamie found himself unsettled by the whole thing. He wanted to leave, yet he felt he could not. He was trapped, and it scared him greatly. Suddenly,
A noise not dissimilar to the ruffling of paper came from somewhere in the darkness. He quickly and readily turned towards it, unsure of what to expect. He almost felt relieved when he saw the plain white papers scattered across the floor. The wind from above must have moved them, he thought, trying to convince himself of what he knew could not be true. Cautiously, the grizzled man shuffled towards the pile of scattered papers. Upon reaching them, he took a kneeling position and grabbed a page up in his hand. It was small, as if it had, at one point, belonged to a journal of some kind. Across the top, the text read, October 16th, 1987. Intrigued, Jamie did what any man in his position would. He read on.
It's about 8:23 p.m. as I write this. The music is still going, and somehow it keeps getting louder. The maintenance guys checked the speakers over a dozen times now. They keep claiming that it's the only place it could be coming from. No one believes it, though. We all know where it's coming from, even if we don't want to believe it. It's Subject 3. It has to be. I don't know how or why it's doing it, and I don't think I really want to. This whole thing, this experiment, has gotten way out of hand. Duskin has lost all authority. Not even he knows what's happening here. We followed him for so goddamn long, and this is where he leads us? To our own fucking tomb? He hasn't said it, no one has, but we all know it. We're going to die here. I can feel it in my bones and sense it every time I look at the damn monitor. Subject 3? I don't know what the hell it is, and I won't pretend to. All I know is that those terrible fucking eyes convey nothing but a desire to kill. It feels like they're just toying with us now. Everyone's on edge. Everyone is afraid. I can see it in their eyes. The only person who seems to be even remotely composed is that doctor. We're all pacing around trying to shake the fear away. Well, he just sits there in that damn chair of his, staring off into nothingness and scribbling God knows what into that diary of his. Some of us considered leaving. With those guards incapacitated, no one's going to try and stop us. I can only imagine what they went through. I'm just glad I wasn't there to see it. Regardless, it's time to go. I think the world should know about what's happened here. Duskin can't keep doing this. More red paint was splattered across the page, making it impossible to read further. What is this place? Jamie whispered to himself in dreary darkness. Where once Jamie had only been vaguely afraid, he was now full of fear. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what had transpired here, but he was, more than anything else, afraid. The shivering was no longer entirely due to the cold, and he knew it. He didn't want to know anything else. He didn't want to know what happened here. He just wanted to leave, just as the man or woman who wrote that entry did. Yet, he couldn't. It was either fear or a cold, lonely death. And he wasn't about to let fear chase him back out into that storm. Oddly enough, the feeling he felt in his gut was similar to the one of hunting a bear for your first time. The difference, however, was that he could track the bear, and he wasn't alone when he did so. In there, though, in that bunker of terrible secrets and even worse experiments, he was alone, and without any way to track the threat. Not to mention, he didn't even know what the threat really was. Yes, he was armed, But where was the bear? Like an answer to a prayer, a sound suddenly emitted from the room on the far left wall. Only, it wasn't just a sound. No, it was something else. It was music. The melody was quiet, only just reaching his ears through the thick metal door. With the finesse of a hunter, Jamie readied his magnum in one hand and crept toward the door with his flashlight shining in the other. Upon reaching it, he slowly and quietly put his ear to the cold metal surface. Not only could he hear the melody with perfect clarity, but he could also make out the lyrics. "I don't worry," the high-pitched singing voice said. "Worrying don't agree. Things that bother you never bother me." He pulled away from the door. "What the hell is going on here?" he thought to himself. "I've got to get in there." With his fears suppressed, Jamie took a step away from the door. He breathed in slowly and then out, calming the pounding drum that was his heartbeat. With both magnum and flashlight readied, he quickly pushed the door handle downwards and put his weight into the door, opening it in one fluid motion. He couldn't help but retch at the sight before him. There were bodies everywhere, every single one mutilated in one way or another. Some were only missing limbs. Others were barely recognizable as human. What he now realized as blood covered all the walls and floors, making the dull concrete walls nearly invisible. The mutilation of the corpses, however, wasn't the most disturbing part. All of them were posed in various dancing positions. There were no harnesses or cables. All of them seemed to be held up by their own force and volition. And inscribed into each of their faces was an expression of utter terror and dismay. Jamie, in a state of panic and fear, quickly fled the room, shutting the door behind him. It was then that he saw it. Across the room, standing over the door which had been torn off its hinges so long ago, was something even worse than what waded through the door behind him. He studied it intently, while it seemingly did the same to him. It stood tall, lanky, and completely devoid of hair, with a strangely elongated head and eyes darker than the most desolate areas of space. Various parts appeared to be missing as well, such as its ears and nose. It wore a gray jumpsuit which seemed much too small for the monster. Its long porcelain limbs were indescribably smooth in texture, possessing a kind of cleanliness Jamie had never seen anywhere else. Its long, skinny fingers hung perfectly still at its side. Its expression was one of complete indifference, and across the left part of its chest was what appeared to be a name tag, which read in big, bold letters, Subject 3. Without a second thought, Jamie quickly brought his magnum up and aimed it at the monster. The creature, however, was much faster. With impossible speed, it crossed the room before the terrified man could fire off a single bullet. In one fluid motion, it smacked the gun out of his hand, grabbed him by the neck, and pinned him against the wall. Jamie struggled, for it was all he could do. He pulled at the demon's hand and kicked its legs, but it was to no avail. The monster's strength was vastly superior to his. In his peril, Jamie could only utter one question through the tight grip of the thing's cold fingers. "What are you?" Subject 3 leaned in close to his ear. Its voice wasn't really a voice. It was something else entirely.
It possessed no tone, no mood, no frequency, only an ethereal hum coded in language. And in that horrible, toneless voice, it whispered to Jamie, "Something impossible." Without warning, the music grew in volume to such a point that Jamie's ears actually began to bleed. Living in the sunlight, loving in the sunlight, having a wonderful time, the terrible sing-song voice echoed full of glee. The poor, helpless man couldn't help but scream as his eardrums began to pop one after the other. Then, with its eyes staring directly into Jamie's, Subject 3 began tearing at the man's stomach with one hand as it held Jamie against the wall with the other. He watched in terror as his intestines and organs spilled across the floor. He thought he was screaming, but he couldn't hear anything. He begged and he pleaded, but the thing just kept tearing and pulling at his insides. With a final, pathetic gasp, the light left his eyes and his voice died away. Subject 3 loomed over the corpse of his latest kill, staring at him with absent eyes. For a moment, it considered allowing the dead man to join the others in the room to his rear. It knew, however, that it had no time to continue playing such childish games. No, there was work to be done, blood to be spilled, and questions to be answered. More than that, however, there was fun to be had. Subject 3's old friend, that doctor fellow, managed to skip out last time. Poor man. It wasn't fair that he should be excluded. The doctor was due for a visit, it seemed. Oh, how delighted he would be to see Subject 3. The thing turned its gaze toward the ladder and, at a brisk pace, climbed its rungs one by one until it found itself standing in a small concrete building, surrounded by a vicious blizzard. Blistering wind poured in through the open doorway, rushing over the creature's smooth scalp. It didn't faze Subject 3, though. The creature couldn't even feel it. The once imprisoned monster was free at last. As it stood there, soaking up the cold winds, it couldn't help but think that if it could feel, happiness would no doubt be the emotion present. From a distance, one might claim to have heard something else from within the howling blizzard that night. A song full of joy and smiles, one that would no doubt usher in many good times. And as Subject 3 trudged through the deep snow, it couldn't help but think the same thing. There was fun to be had, and it couldn't wait to get started.